The River Spey, one of the iconic watercourses of Scotland, has many faces, each one reflecting the character of the ever-changing scene. The Spey is Scotland's third longest river, and one of its most famous, being known the world over for its magnificent wildlife, its salmon, and of course its whiskey. And I'm following it all the way from its source to the sea. Scotland's rivers have shaped the nation and are among the country's greatest treasures. Since the earliest times, rivers have been used as natural highways. Along their banks, the first towns and cities were built. And as a natural resource, rivers have provided us with an abundance of food and power. In this series, I'll meet a cast of characters who live along the banks of our great waterways and uncover intriguing tales from the past as I travel across Scotland on a grand tour to explore the original waters of life. In this programme, I'm setting off down the River Spey on a grand tour to discover a sometimes reimagined world. The Spey is the third longest river in Scotland, and at 172 kilometres needs 2 grand tours to complete the journey to the sea. My route begins at a remote location on the edge of the Monalea Mountains and follows the river through the wild lands of Badenoch to a hidden tributary where a secret love once blossomed, and then returns by steam to a riverside railway. This desolate moorland is empty of people, and there's not a house to be seen, literally for miles and miles. Yet it's up here at over 1,000 feet that the River Spey is born. And that unassuming body of water behind me is Loch Spey, the start of my river grand tour. The unnamed headwaters of the River Spey, which feed the loch, rise from boggy ground that's typical of Scotland's watershed in this part of the Highlands. These bleak uplands may seem desolate, but for some wild creatures they make an ideal habitat. Circling in the wide skies above me is a Scottish icon, the golden eagle. Here, the mountains are a haven for these great birds of prey, where they build eyries on inaccessible cliffs and outcrops of rock. But some of the newly hatched chicks have a destiny mapped out for them by human hands. Rick Taylor of the South of Scotland Golden Eagle Project is imagining a different future for these birds, which were once widely persecuted. So here we are, Rick, big wide skies in the middle of eagle country. Now I understand at one time, eagles would have covered the whole of Scotland.
Yes, and most of England. Yeah,
really?
In the uplands of England, all the way down the west coast. So, yeah, and they've just been pushed into the far north and the west now, where they are doing extremely well and starting to expand out again. So,
because the eagle population in the north is relatively healthy, there's an opportunity for the birds to expand the range, but they need help from us. Working with the landowner, Jahama Highland Estates, the South of Scotland Golden Eagle Project has a licence to move them south to the borders, where there are currently thought to be just 3 breeding pairs.
well, it's a translocation project, so the first thing we have to do is, by working with the Scottish Raptor Study Groups, locate a nest of twins, so 2 eagles, with which we then have to access via a climber.
That would be difficult.
Yeah, thankfully not my job. So, so a climber will go down, collect both chicks. They'll be checked by a vet on site. If they're both healthy, we'll take one to be translocated to the south and return one to the eyrie for the parents to raise as normal.
Right. I mean, will the parents not miss the fact that one of them is gone?
Well, often with eagles, the older sibling will kill the younger, weaker one anyway, so
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
this is a win-win situation then, because you're getting 2 eagle lives for the price of 1.
Potentially, yeah, potentially. So we're just hoping that, you know, we can boost the population down in the south, which is just clinging on by a talon, if you will, and hopefully we'll be able to return them to southern skies. From their vantage point high on the cliffs,
The eagles of the Mona Lea look down on the Spey as it flows into an artificial loch created in the 1940s by hydro engineers.
In a feat of engineering conceived on a truly monumental scale, the flow of the River Spey was actually reversed for the sake of industry.
Instead of flowing northeast towards the Murray Firth, a canal was dug by engineers to divert some of the river west towards Loch Laggan. Aqueducts and a tunnel through Ben Nevis then carried the water from Loch Laggan to Fort William, generating electricity for the Lochaber aluminium smelter. But not all the river water is extracted. The Spey continues to flow along its original course, deep into land that was traditionally Macpherson country. Here, there are reminders in the landscape of this once dominant clan. A tall cairn overlooking the Spey is dedicated to clan chief Ewan Macpherson.
Known to history as Clooney Macpherson, he raised over 400 members of his own clan to take part in the Jacobite Rising of 1745. Now, when this was crushed at the Battle of Culloden, Clooney went into hiding and remained a fugitive for 9 years, despite the fact there was a bounty on his head of £1,000.
Famously, Clooney was also entrusted with the Prince's Gold, which was sent from France to aid the Jacobite campaign. To find out more about this legendary fugitive, I'm meeting up with local historian Angus Macpherson beneath a cliff face known as Craig Dhu.
Angus, Ewan Macpherson, Clooney Macpherson, was a very important character in Jacobite history, was he not?
Yes, he was. He was an extremely important man. He was a regimental commander for Bonnie Prince Charlie. He was trusted by Bonnie Prince Charlie, and he was the person given the responsibility of dispensing the gold, which is sometimes called the Loch Archay gold.
Clooney was a fugitive for 9 years. How on earth was he able to evade capture for such a long period of time?
I think a lot of it was to do with the fact that he had a very loyal clan round him, and they were protecting him. And he was very cautious, and he never slept anywhere for very long, and he was always moving around.
One of Clooney's hidden bolt holes is an improbably inaccessible and almost invisible cave situated on the dizzy heights of Craig Dhu. To get there involves a dangerous scramble.
What's it like inside?
It's Spartan, small and confined.
Angus tells me more about the Jacobite gold, which he says may have been hidden in the loch below Craig Dhu.
That is one of the rumours that it could have been one of its hiding places.
So he could keep an eye on it?
So he could keep an eye on it from up there, from his eyrie.
After 9 years on the run, Clooney was summoned to France in 1753 by Bonnie Prince Charlie.
Unfortunately, the interview was without coffee. Bonnie Prince Charlie said, "Where's my gold? I want it back," and didn't accept the cry of, actually it's all spent.
To this day, treasure hunters continue to look for the elusive Jacobite gold. Sadly, Clooney never returned to his ancestral lands. He died a pauper in France and was buried in a Carmelite monastery in Dunkirk.
We did try and go and find it quite recently, but there's nothing to be seen in the Carmelite monastery. It was destroyed either just before or after the Second World War.
So there's no trace left of Clooney?
Well, I'm sure there's a bone somewhere, but it's a question of finding it.
Moving further into Macpherson country, I head to the village of Newton Moor, which, as the name might suggest, was at one time a sort of 19th century Highland new town, boasting houses with stone walls and slate roofs, a far cry from the houses they replaced. On the outskirts of the village, it's possible to see examples of these earlier Highland dwellings. Set in several acres of land, Highland Folk Museum is the past reimagined.
Most of the houses here are reconstructions based on archaeological evidence and accounts from the time. But what strikes me is just how primitive looking they are, It's almost like a hobbit house. The walls here, for example, are made of stone and turf, infilling a frame of wood which supports this magnificent thatch, which again is topped off along the ridgeline with more turf.
The basic design concept would not have changed for centuries. Houses like this would have been familiar to people in the Iron Age. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, life in the Highlands became increasingly difficult. First with the repression of the people after the Jacobite risings, then the forced evictions of the clearances, and finally, and surprisingly, through climate change.
In the 18th century, a series of extreme weather events made life in the Highlands almost intolerable. The winters became bitingly hard, and the autumnal floods were on a biblical scale. Now, this caused a series of famines which provoked an exodus of people from the land and was written about in the press at the time.
A newspaper report from 1773 says, "The poor people are in the most piteous situation for want of meal. They are reduced to living on blood which they draw from their cattle by repeated bleedings. Need we wonder to hear of emigrations from such a country?" Just downstream from the reconstructed Highland township, the gaunt ruins of Rathfun Barracks dominate the landscape of Strathspey. They were built in the aftermath of the 1715 Jacobite Rising and later became the focus for military action during the 45, when Bonnie Prince Charlie led the final failed rising.
In April 1746, the Jacobite survivors of Culloden regrouped here to await further orders from their leader, Bonnie Prince Charlie. But Charlie never came. Instead, he sent a letter asking every man to seek his own safety in the best way that he could. Now, it was clear from this that the hopes and dreams of a Stuart restoration were finished, and the news, it said, broke men's hearts.
Witnessing these great historical events was a small boy, James Macpherson, who grew up in the village of Rathfun beside the barracks. In his 20s, James became an author and began to reimagine and to mythologise his own Gaelic-speaking world. In 1760, Macpherson published a series of poems which he claimed had been written centuries earlier by the legendary Celtic bard Ossian, depicted here in a famous painting by Giraudet. But Macpherson's claim wasn't entirely true. Geraldine Parsons tells me why he presented the poems under false pretences.
Geraldine, what do you think Macpherson's motivation was in creating the works of Ossian, reinterpreting and reinventing the past?
There's obviously lots of motivations. So we can think of him with a creative agenda, wanting to make a name for himself as a poet, but others would have been about rehabilitating the image of the Scottish Gael at a time when there had been quite repressive sort of measures taken against Highlanders, against Scottish Gaels in the wake of the 45. We have this very striking memory from an Alan Macpherson, who's a cousin of our James Macpherson, aged 6, talking about throwing stones at the Redcoats as they burned his family home.
The trauma of childhood stayed with Macpherson as he travelled the Hebrides as a young man, collecting stories and songs from the people. He wove these tales into a series of poems which helped to rehabilitate Gaelic culture in the eyes of the British establishment. Macpherson described the work as a collection of fragments from a long-lost Gaelic epic celebrating the virtues of the warriors Ossian and his father Fingal.
So he goes to these legendary heroes, these legendary martial figures, and reinvents them, puts them into a sort of mode that's fashionable and palatable to Enlightenment thought.
But he was a fraud, really, ultimately.
Well, it was a fraud to the extent that he says, I have an ancient Gaelic book, an epic that is written down. It's ancient, it's Gaelic, it's written, and all I'm doing is translating it. And that wasn't true. And in particular, critics in England decide that this can't be true, in part because of bias against Gaelic Scotland. They don't think that Scottish Gaels could have produced great literature. What is true is that he's dealing with authentic tradition, but he's doing something creative, if you like, inauthentic with it.
Right, so he's doing a kind of collage version, an interpretation, but then passing it off as the real thing.
Fake or not, Macpherson's Gallic epic was a bestseller throughout Europe. Napoleon, it's claimed, carried a copy of Ossian into battle. Macpherson made a fortune, moved to London and became an English gentleman before returning to the Spey, where he died a wealthy member of the British establishment. Macpherson's early rebranding of Gallic myth has resounded down the ages, colouring the way we look and respond to the Highlands. It helped to create the romantic ideal of Scotland's wild heart, which has drawn tourists and visitors from around the world ever since. My route from Rathfun follows the Spey towards a tributary, the River Feshie, which flows through beautiful and remote Glen Feshie, where gnarled Scots pines stand sentinel over the gravel banks and river flats.
This is a truly inspiring landscape. And 200 years ago, those who came here recognised that this was just the sort of place to imagine a different kind of world, a world of love and romance. And just along the riverbank here are the ruins of a place that became one of the most scandalous love nests in 19th century Britain.
The lovers in this story were the brilliant artist Edwin Landseer and Georgina, the second wife of the Duke of Bedford. He was 21, she a lively, passionate and intelligent woman of 42. They met when Landseer was commissioned to paint Georgina's portrait. After they became lovers, they came to Glen Feshie, where Georgina had built a rustic, artistic hideaway.
Here they could escape from the suffocating constraints of aristocratic society, a place where she and her friends could come to act out a highly romanticised version of Highland life.
The love affair inspired one of the most iconic images ever created of the Highlands, Landseer's famous Monarch of the Glen, which for me epitomises the artist's deep passion for the landscape and for the woman who introduced him to it.
The love between the artist and the Duchess caused a scandal, but this was not lust. This was the real thing. This was the love of their lives. Georgina bore Landseer's child, a daughter, and the relationship lasted for 30 years until Georgina died.
Landseer was devastated by the loss of his lover, turning increasingly to drink and drugs for solace. He never forgot his love for Georgina and their life together, but of their Highland love nest in Glen Feshie, there's nothing left except for the chimney stack of the Highland shack they once shared.
It's an unlikely and surprisingly moving memorial to a love affair that was the scandal of the age. There's not much left of it, of course, but up there on the chimney, you can see where the roofline once joined the wall here. And down at the base, behind this wooden panel, is where they would have lit their fire. Now, in this roofless and wall-less space, the Duchess and the artist lived and loved in a world that both had reimagined, in a sense, he with his art and she with her romantic version of Highland life. And now, well, it's all gone back to nature.
Glen Feshie is being reimagined in the 21st century. This wild and beautiful landscape was once endangered, combination of neglect, overgrazing and the loss of habitat. But all that is changing, and changing radically. On a decidedly chilly morning, I'm meeting up with Thomas MacDonnell, who's the Director of Conservation on the 30,000-acre Glen Feshie estate. To get about, he's providing suitably robust transport. The drive takes us through large areas of native pine forest above the river. This is a unique, important, but vulnerable habitat. Significantly, the trees here are naturally regenerating, without the aid of replanting or fencing to keep out grazing animals.
So what we're looking at here is there's a tree, an old tree, referred to as a granny pine. It was 260 years old or thereabouts. And this is a photograph from 2006.
Right, so 16 years ago, that's the granny pine, I'm taking it.
All of a sudden, we just got this emergence of seedlings.
That's amazing. So all these seedlings here, all these wee saplings, have come from these one or two old trees. So they're all related. This is a family affair.
I couldn't be sure about that, but they have come from how long they've been in the soil and where they've come from here, because we haven't taken anything in. So yes, but it's really quite. I find it quite inspirational, actually.
It's transformative. It really is.
As we continue our safari, Thomas tells me about the 200-year vision for Glenfeshie, his cathedral thinking, he calls it. Reducing deer numbers is key to allowing the forest to regenerate and the whole environment to become more robust and better able to face the challenges of the future. To demonstrate the benefits of rewilding, Thomas invites me to witness a rare but iconic Highland gathering which is taking place close to the river. Just a few metres from us and strategically arrayed are several black grouse, the cocks ready to display. This is the famous lek.
You can just see the white flash there.
Oh, I
of
do.
the tail.
There's another one.
Yeah, that's the males, they're the black cocks.
The chill air is filled with an eerie burbling sound as the cocks puff themselves up, not to impress the females, but to intimidate each other.
Well, they do that. They seem to almost wrestle with each other. The one that survives gets the honour of doing the business with the female.
So it's last man standing, or last cock standing. They're enjoying the sunshine. It's a sign of spring.
Leaving the glen and the River Feshie, I return to the River Spey, where I follow the long-distance path, the Speyside Way, which connects Aviemore to the Murray coast. In the village, I head straight to the station. Behind the platform is a huge Victorian shed. To walk inside is to take a step into the past. For steam enthusiasts, this is a magical place, a cornucopia of engineering delights. The workshop is run by the Strathspey Railway, a charitable trust staffed mostly by a band of dedicated volunteers. The railway took over the old steam route from Perth to Inverness, which was axed in the 1960s. Douglas Scott has been helping the railway for the past 30 years or so. He's passionate about steam.
What's the story behind this extraordinary shed?
This shed was built in 1898 by the Highland Railway Company, and they needed somewhere en route between Inverness and Perth where they could change engines and also where they could maintain engines. So this shed was built to house 16 locomotives of the day.
The locomotive shed is the heart of the Strathspey Railway, which has saved 5 miles of track along the river, where volunteers and enthusiasts preserve the golden age of steam.
People in the UK have a passion for railways, particularly for heritage railways, and particularly for heritage railways that are operated with steam engines. They can't get enough of them.
Well, understandably so. I mean, they are wonderful machines. I mean, they're transformed by coal and water from lumps of dead iron to a living, breathing machine. That's the magic.
Yes, they're the very elemental, fire and water and sweat.
Sweat is cheap, but it's not enough to keep the railway going. It costs somewhere in the region of £250,000 every time one of these beasts gets a full service. Although the railway is mostly staffed by volunteers, it has 20 full-time employees and several apprentices. Shona MacDonald is one of them.
Hi, Paul.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How
What
are
are
you?
you doing? Is it welding?
Yeah, it's a bit of MIG welding, just getting a wee bit of practice in.
Well, I don't think I've seen so many steam engines under one roof together before, and so many in bits. And are these actually ever going to get back together again?
Yeah, they will do. One of the engines has just been kind of taken apart to get redone. The boiler's actually there for it.
Shona has been close to these magnificent machines for longer than most. They are almost in her blood.
Where I live, actually, where I grew up, it's actually right by the railway. So we saw the trains passing like every day, apart from when they weren't on. So you get some of the kids in our street trying to race the train. I can't actually ever remember if they actually managed to beat it or not, but they would try it.
Today, the magnificent 828 locomotive, which dates from 1899, is all steamed up, ready and raring to go. Douglas invites me to lend a hand shoveling coal into the boiler, traditionally the job of the fireman.
How much coal would a fireman be expected to shovel into the boiler on a journey, say, from Perth to Inverness in the old days?
Perth Inverness with a big mainline engine, I would reckon about 8 tons.
8 tons?
About 8 tons of coal.
Over what duration? 3 hours or something?
About that, yeah. About that.
Backbreaking work.
Absolutely, yes. The poor old fireman didn't sit down from when the train left Inverness till he came over the top at Dromoctor. He was on his feet the whole time.
Knackered. Was being a fireman a kind of rites of passage? Do you have to be a fireman before you could be a driver?
A driver started as an engine cleaner. Then he was promoted to begin to learn how to fire. Then he would be promoted to an actual fireman, then to a past fireman, when he would be able to do some driving. And finally, probably after about 25 years, would become a driver.
25 years?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're the driver, you're at the pinnacle of the pyramid.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yes.
I know my place.
Yes, I looked
your shovel.
Oh,
thank you very
that
much.
one. Did you hear the noise the shovel made?
That
It's
was
like a
sweet,
golf
wasn't
shot.
it? Yeah.
It's like when you hit a golf shot properly, the shovel goes zing and tells you that your timing's perfect.
Flattering words, but I'm an even worse golfer than a fireman. So I leave the grubby work to the enthusiasts and choose instead to find a place in the first-class carriage behind the locomotive. As we steam alongside the glorious River Spey, I'm happy to let the train take the strain, as they used to say. The track we're running along was once part of the old main line to the north, but today we can only travel as far as Broomhill, just a few miles up the line from Aviemore.
The Strathspey Railway have got ambitious plans to extend the line all the way to Granton-on-Spey. Who knows, perhaps one day they will. I certainly hope so.
All too soon, the magical experience of riding on a Victorian steam train is over. We pull into Broomhill and it's time to leave the train and to say goodbye to Douglas.
This picturesque wee station is as far as the train can take me, for the time being at least. But the River Spey continues on for another 50 miles or so to the open sea, making this the ideal place for me to end the first leg of my grand tour down the magnificent Spey.
On my next grand tour, I'll be continuing my journey to the sea, down the abundant River Spey.